I'm Andrew, and welcome to One Shots Tavern, a TTRPG podcast where we seek out new ways to tell your stories through different systems and games. And today we are talking to Jean-Luc at the Dungeons Key. And I first met you, Jean-Luc, through the Discord of IGDN, and then subsequently in person at PAX Unplugged just a couple of months ago here. But thank you so much for being on the podcast. Welcome.
Thanks so much, Andrew, for having me.
Today, we are talking about another incredible Zine Month project, Dirtbags. So, Jean-Luc, your background is in creating a lot of incredible supplements for Morkborg, old school essentials, things along those lines, and really diving into the design space of like making, like, I know with your Morkborg supplements, you really created more of like a campaigned approach of really stretching out the experience within the Morkborg that can be a bit more like episodic or short form. I love that spin on the Morkborg experience. I also really like the aesthetics that you paired in the books that I've seen that have come from you, like really leaning into that, you know, AD&D aesthetic. And it's very clear, as a designer and stuff, it's very clear early on when being greeted with your work that you put a lot of effort into the visual experience and the quality and the vibe that's getting set. So right out the gate, for our video people, I have a little playtest copy here of this pretty looking book, but Dirtbags is a total vibe. So why don't you kick it off and pitch me on this game that absolutely, like, on a shelf on a Kickstarter page, definitely grabs my attention.
I mean, so first of all, you know, I have to shout out the artist, you know, Francesco Lobo, who I've been working with. I mean, frankly, I think his art sells the book much better than I think I ever could, frankly, because he's just been phenomenal to work with. But as far as the book is concerned, Dirtbags is a cinematic sci-fi shooter RPG. It's a bit of a mouthful, but at its core, what we're trying to do is to give players as much agency and flexibility and sort of the types of actions they can take, and the things they can do, while also packing it full of, you know, rule light, fast-paced, you know, heavy combat. Primarily shooting, but there's all sorts of melee weapons as well, explosives, etc. The themes of the game are primarily revolve around your typical, you know, kind of corporate-run dystopian world. But in Dirtbags, players are taking on the role of convicts who have been recruited into the RIP, the Rehabilitation Incentive Program. Essentially, with they've been promised, they've been given hope to reintegrate into society, to be, you know, forgiven of their sins, and all they've got to do is sign on the dotted line and then get churned through this war machine, where, you know, the corporate echelon is sending them on all sorts of missions to fight, swarms of alien bugs, or, you know, go on suicidal pirate missions, to kind of go on hauling missions, you name it, right? Fighting scabs and all sorts of folks, basically.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, obvious, at least for me, obvious touchstones of like Suicide Squad and like, you know, a lot of like kind of Helldivers sort of experience where like you're just a cog in the machine getting thrown at the front line. And it's such a fun play space because at least with like a lot of like the OSR style games that kind of take that your life doesn't matter approach, at least like to the gameplay experience, it's fun to tie it into the story and how the corporate like churn and the way that they're basically throwing you into purgatory really like mirrors that, at least I'm assuming, a lot of play experience of like the lethality and the tone that gets set in the gameplay. So I'm super excited about that. As a, like, I enjoy a nice little shooter every once in a while. I'm a big fan of like Destiny 2 and I've played those games for a long time. Reading through the at least this playtest copy that I got from you at PAX, the book is mechanically it really shocked me how succinct you were able to make mechanics about such a combat focused like shooter experience in like, at least at the time, under 50 pages. That blew my mind. Like, what were some of your early like guardrails in terms of design and like creating the proper design space for yourself, like to know what is the tone mechanically, what is Like, where do I want to be designing, and what are my limits? Like, what are the lines I'm not crossing into too much simulationist, or whatever have you?
Sure. Yeah. So to touch on some of the themes that you mentioned, right? Helldivers and the like, absolutely. Those are core themes of the story. I leaned a lot originally into Starship Troopers, Tank Girl, sort of this Mad Max-esque, dystopian or post-apocalyptic style of world. But I think a lot of folks, and especially like in Helldivers and in Starship Troopers, the satire is really a commentary on fascism and all of that, and I it's one of the things I want to kind of get away from, and I think that it's cool and all that jazz, that you're part of the call, but it kind of glorifies being part of the corporate
Yeah.
echelon, and that's one of the things that I want to kind of do away with, simply
Mm.
because I feel like some folks just don't get that it's satire, and I don't think that it needs to be
Yep.
glorified. So I lean a lot more into the sort of cyberpunk aesthetic of F the corporate machine, right?
Yeah.
Never join, always resist,
Right.
fight back. They sort of accepted their fate, but they never accept that that they never want to
They
or
don't think they're
celebrate
the
the
good guy.
corporate
Yeah.
machine. No, that's right. So
Yeah.
mechanically, to your point about like setting guardrails, absolutely, it was something that I needed to do. But what a lot of folks don't realize is that yeah, I was able to get it down to your playtest copy is 50 pages. The quick start guide, which essentially is just the core rules, I've got down to 20 pages. It's even more
Oh
condensed.
my gosh.
And so I started working on Dirtbags a little over 2 years ago when I was doing all of the more board Kickstarters and stuff like that. It was something that it was just a passion project that I was sort of doing in between larger books. And this is the eighth iteration of Dirtbags. And
Wow.
I would say that the system uh, changed entirely from a D20 based system up until the sixth version of the game to the seventh and eighth version, switching to a dice pool system.
Wow.
So guardrails I set up early on were it needed to be, rules light, fast paced. It needed to focus on shooting. The gunplay needed to be crisp. There needed to be risk involved. And I think the motto I set out, early on for the game was to survive the mission together. That's what I wanted players to do. They needed to be able to, go back for fallen comrades, shoot a seemingly unlimited amount of bullets. In this case, Dirtbags is not unlimited. In fact, you're
Yeah.
limited quite a bit on the resources you have available to you. But players should have complete control over how many bullets they shoot, whether they empty their entire magazine or not. So I would say that those are some of the guardrails, some of the themes that I set out
Yeah.
really, really early on in the development of Dirtbags that kind of led to where it is now.
I think one of my favorite things, correct me if I'm wrong, especially if it's changed. I believe when I was reading through it, I read it right after PAX, so it's been like a month or two since. Isn't like shooting essentially a free action? Like it just like happens.
100%. Yep.
I
Yep.
love that so much because like that mirrored what it felt like the tone of the game is. Like this is about shooting. Why would you put action economy tied to the act of shooting? It's assumed you're firing your gun. Like
Right. Yeah.
that was like
Pull
I
the trigger.
remember reading, and when I hit that point, I'm like, that is the simplest, most elegant way to handle that, because there's so many games where like their solution to creating a good combat sim for like a high action, high like frequency of things occurring kind of environment is more action economy. Is okay, well you
Sure.
have like 6 actions and you can spend them however you want. You could do 3 shoots and a move and this and that, which like is kind of a direction I'm going with a smaller project that's kind of a shooter.
Yep.
But it was so cool to see you say, what if we didn't tie it to action economy? It's assumed, obviously there's limitations on it,
Of
but
course.
like it's not a thing you need to think about. Oh, am I going to shoot?
No,
So that
that's
kind
right.
of design space really was intriguing to me, even in how you handled some of the other elements. So when it comes to the game as a whole, we get to be these criminals. We get to be thrown into like a mission cycle. So do you want to talk a little bit about what that session over session experience versus like a one-shot game?
Absolutely, yeah.
What's that like?
Sure, yeah. So, I mean, I tried to design Dirtbags to be kind of focused around the idea of operations and tours of duty. So, if you think of one shots as operations and tours of duty as sort of longer style campaigns where you maybe it's more episodic where you stitch, one operation to another. There's nothing preventing anyone from having a much longer operation or like really, really drawn out tours of duty.
Hmm.
The latter is like sort of especially encouraged. But the economy in terms of credits that players can spend on equipment and gear and all that jazz really revolves around a couple of things, right? So the stipend that players get, they receive after they complete an operation. Um, Player character progression is based off of the completion of tours of duty.
Mm,
You can spend credits to reduce your sentence in order to get more benefits. So ability score increases. You can take kind of these sort of projector courses that can be shot into your eyes, and you can learn kung fu essentially, if
that's
you know what I mean.
awesome. Yep.
Um, so yeah, I like to think that it's episodic, just like it might be for like a Starship Troopers,
Yeah.
show of some kind, and then you kind of would feed the loop that way.
Right. So, so some games that have a bit of that episodic mission structure have like a downtime side of things. Is that a thing that you explore much, or is it much more emphasized on just the mission side of things?
Yeah, there's nothing really in the game to focus, like to have, like you wouldn't have an entire session based on downtime.
Right.
It's really about getting back into the action.
Yep.
And so the downtime that players do experience is what will really revolve around spending their credits
Hmm.
and character progression.
Yeah.
So for instance, there's shore leave in the game, so when you complete a tour of duty,
Hmm.
right, and just to make it simple, a tour of duty essentially is pretty straightforward. You pick a difficulty, you can go all the way to get raised, or you can start at I want my mommy, and the idea there is that you just roll a D2, a D6, a D2, a D3, a D6, D6 plus one, a D6 plus two, number of operations that you're going to be playing. And then
Yeah.
when you might end up with just the one operation, or you may end up with say 4 or 5. And the idea is that once you've completed all of those operations, you get shore leave. And so shore leave is just another way to progress your characters. You would roll on the shore leave table, and gain a certain benefit for n number of operations, or something crazy will happen to your character. You may even get jumped. In which case you'll just be penalized, and your character will just get even more fallout, which is essentially sort of like a detractor that you can apply to your character.
Yeah, yeah. I remember like the Fallout table being a thing pretty early on in the book, and I'm I'm in a phase of designing right now of pretty much exclusively filling out different roller tables and
Yeah.
like really fleshing out that side of the game, the reusability on my project. So I mean, with a Morkborg kind of background, with the OSE background, how much of that play experience are you kind of porting over to Dirtbags, and then how would it differ from that kind of play experience?
That's a really great question, because a lot of the influence for early dirtbags, I'm talking versions 1, 2, 3, the rule lightness of it really was influenced by Morkborg a considerable amount.
Hmm.
I started with only the 4 core abilities, D20 based style game. I still tried to expand on the D20 side, where you could you had like a range of success that you could roll to take the number of actions you wanted. But even firing your weapon, ammunition was very, very different. To the point where it resembled a lot more like Cyborg than
Hmm.
it does the current iteration of the game.
Yeah.
Um, uh, and I realized, around the 5th or 6th version of the game, unfortunately, or fortunately, that I tried to superimpose a system on top of an idea that I had for Dirtbags, as opposed to taking the idea of Dirtbag and fleshing out a system that was influenced by what I was trying to accomplish.
Yeah.
So I was really trying to fit, a square peg in a round hole
Hmm.
early on by forcing Dirtbags to be a lot more like, Morkborg hack, more cyborg hack, than, giving it the freedom that it kind of really deserved in terms of like the cinematics and the shooting that I want to emphasize in the game.
That's awesome. Yeah, I feel like my my approach to that is like I very early on when I was working on um Battle School, I was like, I want to create this feeling, right? This idea for the system that's underneath it, which is entwined. That like I want people to work together, right? Like that was the main core principle was like people need to actually be collaborating and doing things
Yes,
strategically together. And that was the design space that was interesting to me. And I just hadn't seen games that best facilitated that in the way that I wanted, right? So I was like, we're going wholesale. There's no system out there that does this. I'm just making it from the ground up. You had a lot more experience
100%.
with hacking other systems for a
Yep.
while. And I'm like, for somebody that was as so arrogant as to just come out the gate
Your
and just
first
make it
game.
wholesale first game insane. What is that transition like? Like what caused you to like have that moment of like I actually need to decouple this from what I've been doing and do
Yep.
something inventive and new.
That's a really, really great question. I think I leaned into Morkborg, OSC, Death in Space, and a lot of these other sort of systems, primarily because their licenses are so free,
Yeah,
and open, and commercially viable.
right.
I was exploring a new space as far as Morkborg and OSC were concerned, are concerned, simply because I grew up on D&D, fifth
Yeah,
edition, fourth edition, 3.5, and so it was really exciting for me to explore new games and
yeah.
new settings and new themes. Something away from the high fantasy that I was used to, and that really kind of tailored to this kind of like dark humor, grim, dark, satirical, ultra violent nature of these kinds of games. As far as decoupling them, I think I've always wanted to make my own game, and I always like brainstorming new mechanics,
Hmm.
especially for instance, when I was creating, homebrewed, fifth edition campaigns, I think I'm always creating something. And that's true of Morkborg as well, right?
Hmm.
Whether you're taking an existing system and hacking it,
Yeah,
right? You're creating new monsters, you're trying to
you're
find
doing
new
game
and
design.
innovative
Yeah,
ways of using the same mechanics, differently,
right.
and in novel ways. I think that's what was so freeing about working on something like Morkborg, is
Hmm.
that it's so rules light. You're sort of forced to think outside the box, and once you've done that,
Hmm.
you've kind of broken the barrier for creativity, and creating something new and fun. And so it wasn't really much of a leap to go
Yeah.
from creating those things and homebrewing a ton of content for even fifth edition to wanting to make my own game.
So this is coming out as a part of Zine Quest,
That's right.
and this will be my second time going through that crazy process. Had you done a Zine Quest before?
Accidentally,
Accidentally.
yeah, twice. Accidentally,
Oh my
twice.
gosh. So you just did a
Um,
Kickstarter at the same time
I
and
just
didn't
did a
realize
Kickstarter.
it?
Yeah,
Okay.
well, exactly. So my last two Kickstarters were, well, I've done three three Kickstarters for Morkborg. And so I did three hardcover books, basically back to back, 100 pages. But I did the one called Dwellers of the Bog, which I launched in February 2024, and then Kavlov Sanctuary in 2023, also in February. Not knowing, I was brand
Yeah.
new to the crowdfunding space, and even the Morkborg and indie development space.
Right.
I didn't really realize just what Zine Quest was. So February just
Yeah.
seemed like a great time. Just I didn't want to do it in January. It's cold and sad, and so February seemed like the next best thing. And so yeah, so I actually ran two campaigns during Zine Quest, and I wasn't running a zine.
Yeah, totally. I mean,
So,
that's such a hard part about Zine Quest is like most people aren't doing a zine, really. They're like small book, right?
yeah, but what is a
But what's
zine?
a zine? Exactly.
What is a
Yeah.
zine?
Yeah.
And I think you could argue to some degree that, I think I'm flirting with or skirting the zine lines
Yeah.
with a book like Dirtbags, simply because it's not saddle stitched, it's not
Yeah.
stapled and printed on, uncoated paper. It's not handmade. I get that,
Yeah,
but I still think, that what I'm creating is close enough. And fortunately, so the
absolutely.
Kickstarter staff also agreed with me
Yeah,
when they reviewed the Kickstarter and saw what I was making, and I was
totally.
given the official Zine Quest Zine
Yep.
Month badge. And that validated a little bit that I still think that it belongs
Yeah,
in Zine Quest, in the zine space. I've got stretch goals for digital zines that I'd
hmm,
love to make physical zines of.
right.
So,
Yeah,
yeah,
you
it's just
have
a
like
kind of
some I was looking through your press kit. You've got like some trifold like one-shot adventure things that you're working on.
yep,
I love that form factor, right? Like that's such a cool thing that I've been noticing lately. I did a trifold for my character sheets for Battle School, and
amazing.
it was just like it was a fun way to switch it up from like the D&D like 3.5 like don't get me wrong, I love like when you have the eraser mark that like tore through the paper, like that old
Yep,
stuff, but like man, like having something different really like even for an adventure, right? Being a trifold and being like actually this is everything you need when like your experience before that is I just got a whole 300-page book from Wizards of the Coast for an adventure and that's my point of reference. Like it's such a
it's
cool way
polarizing
to
for sure.
exactly, in a good way, I think that
Yep,
it really pushes somebody out of that experience. Same thing with zine books, like, you read through a smaller book in, like, an hour or 2, and you're like, "Oh, I get it." And, like, I think that, we talk about a lot on this podcast, like and I mentioned before, every game that we've got out there, like it's got its own agenda of the type of play
mhm,
experience that it's facilitating. And I think what is really exciting is a game that is short and quick for you to get through in that pseudo zine category is gonna do that a lot quicker. And you're gonna get to take something away from it a little bit more, portable into
100%.
other play experiences. So, when it comes to like the design ethos and like what you want people to experience when playing this game, like how would you best define that? Especially if they were to take that and do it somewhere else after having played Dirtbags a bit.
Sure. So just to comment quickly on what you're saying, first of all, I just totally agree. I think, one of the reasons why, sort of indie tabletop role playing games, and kind of like one page RPGs and things of sort of that nature, are so successful is because they're so small, and easily digestible, right? I think that if someone's going to be drawn away from these larger tomes or kind of games like your Pathfinder and your fifth edition. I think it has to be short. It has to compete
Yeah.
for your attention, and that means that it's something that you have to learn really really quickly, and be able to run with. And it has to be affordable so that your whole group can get it. Because it's difficult to convince folks to reinvest
Yeah.
into new games. I mean, don't get me wrong, the indie RPG community is massive, and they love to spend their hard-earned cash
Yeah.
on brand new games and supporting Kickstarters. But it pales in comparison to the folks that buy into these larger
hmm
games.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
I think about the simply like just the amount of money I spent on 5e over the years, and it's like I always loved physical, so I still bought pretty
yep,
much everything physical, and then I was using especially because I was playing so much in 2020, it's like I was using D&D Beyond, I had paid for pretty much all the books all over again.
yep, been
It's like
there.
I had bought their entire line twice, right? I was deeply invested. And so like when I first was looking at the larger space, I was like, no way. I'm not doing that all over again because I'm thinking about really the only other options at the time were like, oh, well, it's like Pathfinder, which basically does the same thing with their books.
Yep,
And like the minute I started to just like I've talked about before, like I found like Guilla RPGs as kind of my gateway drug into a lot of the larger space. And I was like, oh my gosh, this can be so much smaller and more portable and usable and
100%.
digestible. So yeah, so about that play experience, what are you wanting
Yes.
people to kind of like adopt from Dirtbags?
Um, I think, and it's not just Dirtbags, but it's these sort of rule light, kind of NSR or OSR style games, that really push the boundary of the creative freedom players have. I think that, for instance, Shadow Dark RPG does a phenomenal job doing that. A lot of this sort of the OSR style games, by Yokai, so Cairn first and second edition, Mothership, right? They strip down a lot of sort of the crunchiness of these staples, break it down so that it's easily digestible and easy to pick up and play, for short and long-term games. So Dirtbags, I think, focuses a lot on that. So that's what I'm expecting from the
Yeah.
from the gameplay. What I focus on specifically was, the flexibility of taking any number of actions that you essentially want, right? Breaking down sort of the traditional action economy, and empowering players to make choices, decisions, giving players agency, and doing anything and everything that they want, without really punishing them. Because
Right, you call it cinematic, like, in
that's
your
right.
description. So it's like it's pushing, I think, especially with also taking your approach to action economy being a lot more flexible, we often feel limited of like, "Oh, I've got my 30 feet of movement, and then I got my action, and then that's it." And, like, people can't really break out of that mentally to do, like, I dash around the room slashing enemies in, like, this cool anime aesthetic,
Sure.
like, moment doesn't feel possible when you have that rigidity.
Correct, yeah, and one of these scenes, that inspired me to create a game like Dirtbags, was from Starship Troopers, where Rico has landed on an alien planet, and they're fighting, swarms of alien bugs, and then this giant, sort of beetle-like rhinoceros flame-throwing
Mhm.
creature comes, burrowing out from the soil, and he runs up, an escarpment, jumps on its back, he's holding on with one hand and he's using his rifle to shoot a hole into its, carapace,
Yeah.
stuffs a grenade in it, and then jumps off and it blows up into pieces. Like
Yeah.
that's cinematic to me. That's one of at least for
That'll
me.
cost you 4 turns of combat.
Right. Well, that's exactly it.
Yeah.
And I want to break that down to a single turn. You're like,
Yeah.
okay, I'm going to run up the hill, jump on its back. I'm going to shoot, which again is a free action
Yeah.
to create a hole into its back, stuff a grenade, and jump off. Well, you've just described 4 actions, and in the dirt bags, that is absolutely possible.
That's great.
So um, uh, that's what I wanted to do with dirt
Yeah.
bags, and I'm hoping at the very least that the D6 pull system that I've sort of designed, with this in mind, is able to kind of pull it off, and I think it does.
That's so fun. Yeah, I really wanna get this on the table. This is, like, top 3 for my 2025, like, things I need to play with
That's very
people. Like, I
flattering.
really like, it's because, like, of my love of the fast-paced shooter as a video game, and it's felt impossible to experience that at the table with the same kind of high energy and, like you said, cinematic, like, gameplay. Like, it never quite felt like I could do enough, or it never felt like the system supported the parts of that gameplay that I enjoyed so much. And, it's not that I just need deep build crafting and crunch of like a
Sure.
Destiny kind of game. It's that I want the feeling. I want the feeling of the power fantasy of the high speed combat, of being able to unload a clip, all of those moments. And it's like it's hard. A lot of games handle shooting in a lot of different ways. Maybe there's reload properties, maybe there's not. Maybe there's tracked ammo, maybe there isn't.
Yeah.
So, to those 2 points, how are you solving those problems? How are we dealing with ammo? It sounds like there is tracked, resources, and then, like, reloading. What are we doing with those?
Sure. Yeah. So just to kind of set the perspective, I've run, Dirtbags play tests at cons. I did at PAX U, I did at Gen Con, and I've done a lot of play testing. I, on average, I could fit in around, 7 combats into a 3 or 4 hour period, just to kind of give you an idea. So seven to eight
Wow.
entire combats,
Yeah.
in
That's
3 to 4 hours,
wild.
which is so you could do two entire rounds of combat and role play.
Uh-huh.
Getting to where you're going and then chatting with NPCs. So two to three per hour,
That's
which is kind of
incredible.
insane. Yeah, so that's how fast paced the game is. So first, to talk about ammunition and firing and reloading.
Yeah.
Um, to kind of lay that out, the way that it works is that there's simply a D6 pool.
Yeah.
Unlike some traditional games where you're building a pool, or adding modifiers to a pool, +2 die or +2 to your roll. It's not like that at all. So we're using only d6s in Dirtbags. And so your whatever, depending on the firearm that you have, there's a capacity. So you'll have, for instance, like a pistol might have, only 46 or 2d6 or 3d6, an assault rifle might have 66, or a light machine gun might have 10d6. And so you have this pool of die. And the idea is that when you roll them, you expend them, right? Whether you hit or not, right? So a success is, from 4 to 6, and a failure is from 1 to 3. Whether you hit or not, once you've rolled it, you've spent that ammunition, and then that die gets placed into your reserve, which is essentially out of play.
Yeah.
And so if you have 66 and you roll all 66 because you've got a fully automatic assault rifle, and you could do that in the game, you would tally up your hits, your misses, and then you would just put all of those die in the reserve. And then when you want to reload, you would use your action pool, which is another d6 pool, to take an action, reload, and then eventually, if you succeed, you would kind of slap all of those ammunition die from your reserve back into your ammunition pool. You would mark off one of your magazines on your character sheet, and then you're off to the races again.
Oh, that's super cool. Okay, so like that's what's cool about that, I think, is you're able to really choose how much you're pushing forward on any situation, and how much you're going to unload your gun and stuff like that, which really, like, I mean, you could completely one shot something by knowing, oh, I can unload my entire clip right now,
Yep.
and then my reload happens after combat. But conversely, it's like, oh, there's so many bugs coming at me, I need to like maintain. It's not about dealing a bunch of damage right now. I need to avoid reloading for as long as possible
Sure.
and take out as many as possible that are coming at me. Which, like, that isn't an experience that I usually have. Usually it's like, again, to use the 5e comparison, it's like, I got a crossbow, I shoot, I reload, or whatever. And it's like, maybe you've got 6 shots in a rifle or something like that. But I really like the approach, especially considering these are like fully automatic weapons that are shooting countless bullets. It's like that issue that I've run into when designing around firearms before, where it's like, oh, well, like an SMG does a D8 of damage. It's like, well, it's shooting a ton of bullets.
Sure.
Like, we gotta consider that it's doing a lot more. And if all of a sudden the rifle that shoots 1 bullet is only doing, like a D8 as well or something, like, we're not accounting for any of the narrative properties of the fact that this thing could spray and pray. This could be,
100%.
used in so many different ways.
Yeah, and actually, so in the first iterations of Dirtbags, I did have a D6 pool for the ammunition. I was using D4s, D6s, D8s, just like you described.
Yeah.
But I struggled doing this because there was nothing to differentiate two firearms, that each had a D8 worth of ammunition, or a D8 worth of damage. Right. And then I started looking at games like, Cyborg, by the Stockholm Cartel and Free League. And, they've got, a revolver that does, a D6 worth of damage. And they've got, an SMG that does D8 worth of damage. I'm like, well, so other than, narratively, like what's separate, what sets these weapons apart? And so that's why I developed, the weapons and the dice pool system the way that I did. I've made sure that every weapon, every firearm at the very least in Dirtbags is unique in that way. So not only does it have a unique capacity, so you might have multiple firearms with, say, maybe 66 capacity, but then you have, for instance, you have the firing mode, you have the effective range of the weapon, et cetera, et cetera. The number, the hit multiplier that it has, so whether each hit deals 1 damage or or 2 or 3. And so, at the very least, all of the starting weapons in Dirtbags are unique in that way.
So you say starting weapons. Let's talk a little bit about progression. So we talked about how there's different like tours that you can go on. Your goal is to survive multiple missions to make enough money to gear yourself up so you can survive more missions to maybe one day get free.
Sure.
So what is the progression? Like, how do you manage that? is it like are you buying like +1 version of the previous gun, or are you buying just completely different firearms? What does that kind of progression look like other than just like stats?
Sure. So I mean, so yeah, so it's not just like a +1 to the gun. I mean, I would say that even the starting firearms in Dirtbags could be used indefinitely.
Great.
Now, that's as far as the base game is concerned, and if we
Hmm.
add expansions or third-party content, there may come a time where again, there aren't levels per se
Yeah,
in Dirtbags, like your HP doesn't really increase.
sure.
Um, but your creds do, and
Hmm.
the amount of gear you have does, and your stats can increase. So eventually, you could find yourself in a position where you're wearing, like armor from head to toe, and you've got,
Yeah,
like a combat flamethrower or a minigun, and you've written adventures, or there are adventures or operations that are throwing significantly more at you than you would traditionally face. But as far as the
yeah,
base game is concerned, like there's nothing preventing you from using, your AR-1,
yeah.
anteater assault rifle, for the entire the duration of an entire
Right.
tour of duty.
Yeah.
So the upgrades that you're really looking for are mainly in your weapon, right? You might want to upgrade from a semi-automatic or single action firearm to an automatic firearm, for instance. That would be a pretty major upgrade. The capacity, maybe upgrading from an assault rifle to a light machine gun. Going from 6d6 to 10d6
Right.
is pretty significant. But then you also have things like your wearables, like pneumatic leg augmentations, or
Mm,
like a jump pack or something like that,
yeah.
to armor, right? So that you've got body part hit points in Dirtbag, so you might want to
Right.
buy armor that will cover more than, say, your torso, your torso and your arms, your torso, your arms and your legs, combat helmets and visors, to protect your head. We haven't really talked about, HP and all that, but when your
Yeah, I
head goes down to
just
0, you
remembered.
die. When your torso goes down to 0, you're incapacitated. So your
Yeah.
action pool goes down to 0. You just essentially, or your bones do anyway. So you can no longer take
Yeah.
any physical actions, which is also, terrifying. But
Yeah.
even when you're incapacitated, firing is still a free action. So you might not be able to move, but you can always pull the trigger,
Somehow.
um, somehow, right?
Yep. No,
So
I
that's kind of where
remember
the progression
reading
leads. Yeah,
I remember reading on HP, yeah, like the way that it cascaded all the way up to the head, limbs
that's
to
right.
the body to the head.
That's
And
yeah,
it's
when you're
like,
bleeding, that's right.
yeah, so it's like your arm is gonna die first, then your torso starts bleeding, then your head. And it's like I haven't had a lot of systems. I think there's some mech games that I've played that like had, local damage, but it was definitely I don't know, like, I haven't played with that yet kind of moment when I was reading through it and I saw that. I was like, this is fun because it makes damage feel like it matters other than just flat number go down. Like it felt
Yeah.
again more cinematic to say like, oh, actually, your arms are all fine. You haven't taken a lot of damage, but you did take damage to your chest, and that's a big deal. And now you're bleeding out, or something to that effect.
Yeah. I love that you're going into this, because I mean it makes me think a lot. It makes me think back to the times when I was playtesting, and how to get these rules sort of
Yeah,
implemented. One of the rules that ultimately didn't make it into the final game, but I still use sort of as an optional rule, like in
yeah.
my own home game, and I'm thinking of adding to like one of the stretch goal zines as sort of like an optional house rule, is that I mentioned that firing is a free action.
Hmm.
And for instance, when an arm, or a leg, or any body part, goes down to 0, you essentially can, you struggle to make use of that limb,
Hmm.
and so you have to roll with disadvantage or severe
Yeah.
disadvantage depending on what's taking place. But one of the optional rules, or one of the rules that I had in the game originally, is that if both of your arms are ruined, or if only one of your arms are ruined, firing is no longer a free action. You actually have to
Yeah.
declare it as part of your actions, because
That makes
suddenly
sense.
you're
It's arduous.
well, precisely. But I leaned more into the fact that you're going to be doing it with disadvantage. I want to
Right.
kind of keep the action up, and give folks a fighting chance when they've been knocked down or they're hurt.
Yeah.
But I still think that expanding or exploring different ways to develop wound systems
Yeah.
for dirtbags could be a lot of fun. So that's what that reminds me of,
Well,
and
and
it's awesome.
I'd love designing around consequences, right? Like
Hmm.
I really took that approach with my system with Entwine, both in Battle School and for Out of Orbit. It's like I want to be able to just generically do damage to the players, right? That's nice
Yep.
sometimes, just quick, keep going, high pace. But also like to not always hit with just numbers, and like to give them a a no but. Like if you're trying to do something, if you're failing, like having something
Sure.
still happen that's narratively compelling and causes new complications and problems for you to have to solve is fun. And I love that, like in this, when we're targeting specific limbs, it's baked in, right? It's already like one more level of a narrative experience to take damage. Um,
Yes.
how is it determined? Is it just a roller table on the GM just to determine where they're dealing damage, or what's that
Yeah, so
assignment?
there's a couple of different ways to take damage in Dirtbags. There's sort of like localized or direct damage, right? So for instance, like when you have a bug, a roach kind of chomping down on one of the players, it's got giant mandibles. That's going to be localized damage, right? The damage is dealt to a single body part,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you would roll to determine which body part all of the hits are going to get applied to,
Gotcha.
right? So if a
Yep.
roach is hitting for 4 points of or for 4 hits, um, you know if a player is unable to defend themselves, because and we haven't really talked about it, but in Dirtbags, players roll to attack and defend, right? So I'm not rolling for a
Yep.
roach to hit you. A roach has a fixed number of hits that it deals, and it's up to
Right.
the player to mitigate all of those hits.
Yeah.
So the idea here is you will roll to see which body part is hit randomly, right? That's for direct or localized damage. And then there's also sort of distributed or area of effect damage.
Yeah.
For instance, if it's like an acid spit or
Mm-hmm.
caustic gas
Yeah.
of some kind. It might say that you're taking 4 hits, and then you mitigate as many of those as you can. And then for however hits remain, you would roll a different body part per
Per hit.
per hit dealt.
Okay.
So if it's area of effect and you're taking three hits, you would roll each of those
Mm-hmm.
3 hits. If it's direct damage or localized damage, and you're taking 3 hits, all of those are going to be dealt directly to a random body part. So that could be your head, and if your head goes down to 0,
Yeah.
you're out of luck. Um,
I think, and the other thing that excites me is like the whole like granular health for the body being a mechanic that has more, and I hate to say it, but like kind of crunch is exciting, because it's like you've picked your battles wisely in what you're putting a lot of mechanical weight on to
yeah,
really drive home that experience of what matters, right? It matters if you get shot. It matters how you get
absolutely,
shot. It
absolutely.
matters, like it matters that you're always unloading your gun. Like this is not about trying to, sweet talk the dragon, that whole trope. Like
Sure.
we are here to fight and to not get
And
shot.
not die, yeah, and to
Yes.
not die. Yeah, and so it's essentially, and you're absolutely right. It's about building, or it's about providing engines to the players, to drive agency and sort
Mhm.
of narrative decisions, right? When I'm told as a player that my leg is ruined or my leg
Yeah.
is bleeding, I feed off of that. I
Yeah.
start to describe my character as limping,
Yeah.
across the battlefield. When I try to get across the hallway or run across the battlefield, with a bleeding limb or a ruined limb with disadvantage, and I don't make it, if I roll a
Mhm.
failure, I'm inspired, narratively,
Yeah.
to describe what happened to my player or my character as a result of the bum leg that I've got, right?
Yeah.
Or the of the ruined arm, or God forbid, if my torso is at 0 and someone's got to drag me across the
Yeah.
battlefield because my bones is reduced to 0 and I can no longer take any actions. So yeah, I think it's always about empowering the player, and
Yeah.
that's where I added crunch. But conversely, enemies don't have
Oh, okay. No called
localized hit.
shots, essentially.
No called, precisely, yeah, like no body part hit points.
Yeah.
And that's how we're able to get through combat so quickly.
Right.
Simply because if a GM is sitting there having to roll, body part hit
Yeah.
points for even like a scab, like a scavenger, or
Mhm.
some corporate entity, like the corporate military police, because you can fight, enemies with firearms and stuff like
Yeah.
that. It's not all bugs, although I would say a larger part of it is, the alien bugs. It can be tedious for a GM to have to manage and to track. So yeah, so enemies have just, a hit point pool, but players have body part hit points because I think it kind of drives that agency.
Yeah. Oh, that's so cool. Yeah, I really love how this sounds. I'm very excited about your game. Now, let's talk a little bit about Kickstarter, Zine Quest, what you're
Yeah.
shooting for, what your goals are, what exciting rewards you might be having. So your campaign's already live. You guys can check it out in the links below. You can check it out.
Yes.
It's so freaking cool, guys. Like, look at the art. This game is really, really awesome. But yeah, what do you got planned for this Kickstarter?
A lot. I mean, I'm putting more into this Kickstarter than I have in any of my previous Kickstarters in terms of kind of content rewards. From the start, I've always been very careful about the amount of risk that I take. Right. So I started with digital copies and print on demand, and I moved from digital copies, print on demand, and a couple of printed books. And then my last Kickstarter, I was almost exclusively printed books. That I had printed, offset prints, working with a printer, and digital, but with no print on demand. As to kind of to avoid cannibalizing,
Yeah.
the physical print run. And now I'm going back at it again. So we've got digital rewards for those folks who either don't have the budget, right? So more
Mhm.
budget conscious choices, and digital copies to physical printed books. There is a print on demand option for the European Union. I'm really excited about some of the like the complete set, so that is
Yeah.
the physical book. You get the three trifolds I was telling you about. So you got physical trifolds as well. So 3 one shots for the game that are separate from the kind of starter operation that's in the book already. And then I'm getting some character sheet pads as well, 50-page character sheet pads, that you can tear off and use, which I'm excited to kind of be delving into. And I'm also getting a rehabilitation incentive program embroidered patch made.
Very
That's going to
cool.
go in the that folks can throw on their bag or take with them as sort of a novelty that they can use at the table to represent the rip. Um, and there's a couple of rewards, one called Hellraiser and one called the F Corpos edition that I'm really excited about. So the Hellraiser, essentially, there's a stretch goal for creating physical pre-gen character cards, and there's only 10 Hellraiser rewards available. That means that each backer of the Hellraiser reward will be able to work with Francesco Lobo to design their own character and have a pre-gen character card.
That's
So there's gonna be
awesome.
10 of those, and so if we reach the stretch goal, we'll actually be getting physical cards made that folks can purchase as add-ons. And then the F Corpos edition is something that I'm in love with. And so the Dirtbags game the book has all of this dirtbag defacing in it,
Mhm.
right? So it's a corporate pamphlet that the dirtbags themselves, diegetically have defaced and just scribbled, all sorts of nonsense on it and kind of crude drawings. But the F Corpos edition will have none of that. It
Oh,
will just be the Corpos edition, and then I'm going to physically ship that book to Francesco to physically deface
that's
by hand.
incredible.
So he will be drawing all sorts of crude nonsense on it, and so it's not going to have the defacing that you would normally get in
You're
the
a genius.
in the book. It's going to be actually defaced by an actual dirtbag. But that
As
one's it's going to be
as
a bit
a
expensive, but
crafty
it's going to
as a
be
crafty guy,
yeah.
I've always wanted to do something like that, but that is a genius way
It's
to get into it.
terrifying,
Oh, I love that.
logistically to get
Yeah.
those books
Yeah.
printed because they're gonna be a little bit different because I'm not gonna be because they're unique, right? It's a Kickstarter exclusive.
Right. It's a small
I
run,
think
more
we're only
expensive
doing
book.
3 of them. And so yeah, I would love even if just one person backs this, I
Yeah.
think it's gonna be amazing.
That's so
Each book will
cool.
be unique, and a great opportunity for Francesco to kind of style on the
Yeah.
art because on the book because he's done just an amazing job uh just defacing the book with
Wow.
everything. Yeah, I'm really
Yeah, I
excited for
mean,
that.
I gotta say the layout is excellent. Like even in
Thank you.
the playtest one that like, I know you still had gaps and stuff in there, but like the book, the style, the layout, the direction of the whole thing, it really is in that like immersive, diegetic, like experiential space while being still a very accessible, readable book. Which is always
Yep.
that fine line you got to walk in making it more of an art piece. And there's people that have strong feelings about Morkborg, for example. I'm sure are very aware. Where it's like for me, I love the idea of these games, but I have the hardest time reading it. Whereas like
100%.
some of my friends, they're like, this tickles my autism in the right way, and I have never been able to read a book better. So it's like, for me,
100%.
this definitely sits in that, like, there's enough cool stuff going on that as a designer, especially, I get to just enjoy each spread, but also it's still very clean and it makes sense. It's got the corpo vibe in there enough that like things are structured well. So I'm very excited to see what your
I
final
appreciate that.
version looks like.
Yeah, I appreciate that a lot. And one of the things, of course, I think the physical book has to have the defacing. That's
Hmm.
it's key to selling the book and everything about it. But as far as accessibility, I think that's just you touched on a really important topic here. And in the same way that Morkborg came out with this kind of ultra in your face,
Yeah.
Doom, metal version with kind of unconventional layout style can make it kind of hard to read. They also came out with a bare bones edition, which
Yeah.
is essentially all of the content, but is just organized in such a way that makes it much more table friendly
Yeah.
or more accessible. And I will absolutely be releasing a version of
Very
Dirtbags
cool.
without the defacing, right?
Yeah.
That just kind of meets just with the kind of the corporate aesthetic,
Hmm.
just to make sure that anybody who has challenges with
Right.
accessibility around vision, or being
Right.
distracted by a lot of kind of crazy art or in your face art, will also be able to enjoy it just as much as everyone else,
And I've seen like
as a
a
digital edition.
incredible trend of accessibility being a priority in the space where people are making even like printer friendly versions, which is like the
Yes,
opposite of what it was, 15 years ago, where it's like
sure.
if you ever print off a PDF, FedEx is going to scream at you or something, like because
Yeah,
you're stealing a book or whatever. But like now, just to your point of like making print on demand available for like EU people, and why you're doing that. You're like, I want to make sure you still have access to a print copy if you want, but like
yep.
I've definitely been looking at, Battle School now that's been out for a bit, and I've been like, I want to make like just a version of this that's quicker for people to just use to print off if they want reference sheets with, because I have a lot of black work in that. And so it's just
Yep.
like it would not work. You would
No,
run out of you would run out
it
of
would
ink in a
cost more to print at home than it would to buy the book.
yeah, it would be a nightmare. And so it's just like I love that being a priority in what you're doing and the ways that
Thank you.
you're working on this book. This is very exciting. Well, I think that's all for me. I just want to play this damn game and dive into it. Thank you so much for being on, and yeah, I'll turn it over to you if you want to throw links and recommendations
Sure.
to people.
Well, first, Andrew, I can't thank you enough for having me on. I think this was awesome, and I love the discussion, and I love how excited you are for the project. You have been from the start. You've been a huge supporter in the project, and having me on, right now is just it's just really appreciated, and so thank you very much.
Yes,
Um,
absolutely.
as far as where people can find me, all of my socials, minus Twitter, minus X. Get out of here. Don't need you. So Blue Sky, Instagram, maybe not for much
Maybe
longer,
not.
maybe not for much longer,
Right.
if I'm being completely honest. So,
Yeah.
but at the very least, Blue Sky, my
Yep.
website, www.thedungeonskey.com or at the Dungeons Key. You should be able to find me on most socials that way. We're gonna have we've got a Discord channel that you can probably find somewhere in the page, the Kickstarter page. By the way, Dirtbags, if you can't tell, is spelled with an exclamation mark. So
Yeah.
Dirtbags exclamation mark. Otherwise, you'll run into a bunch of rock climbing stuff. I had no idea that those guys were called Dirtbags too, but sure, why not?
All right.
Um, and then so we've got a Discord. We've got a subreddit as well, right? So
Yep.
slash r/, Dirtbags RPG. And that's pretty much it. You can also go to dirtbagsrpg.com, right?
Yep.
It will redirect to our site if you can't find it. And that's pretty much it, as
Yeah.
far as
We'll
Dirtbags is
have
concerned.
all those links in the description, especially the most important link, which is the Kickstarter page, which is running right now. You can back it, get in there, check out the options. You've kind of heard a little bit about what your options are, but take a look. Like I've talked extensively about. This is a gorgeous book. You want to pick it up even if you just want a pretty looking book.
Awesome.
And that'll be it for today. We're going to be doing a lot more coverage of Zine Quest throughout the month. You can check out all the links to everything for Dirtbags in the description. You can check out the links for both DJ's project and my project that are running right now as well.
Which I can't wait for, by the way. It looks amazing.
I am so excited. And yeah, all of that's at oneshotstavern.com. And that is all for today. You guys have a wonderful one.